guys, what's up and welcome to another episode of the Goodcast Show. My guest today started his career as a tutor at Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia way back in 1983. He then went on to serve as a professor at Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, International Islamic University Malaysia, Universiti Putra Malaysia, Universiti Brunei Darussalam, and finally Universiti Teknologi Malaysia. In what would be the next chapter of his career, he then became senior partner at Human KPN Consulting Sdn Bhd from 2016 to 2022. He was then appointed as Senior Strategy Officer to one Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia way back in 2018, Datuk Seri Azizah I'm talking about. And finally, he was appointed as Chairman of the Board of Directors of Malaysian Intellectual Property Corporation of Malaysia from 2018 to 2020. Today, he's on the podcast to discuss politics, nation building, the Malay community, as well as Islam in the modern political arena. So please welcome my guest today, Dr. Rozhan Bin Othman. How are you, Doctor?
Thank you, Vinod. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
Yes, thank you for being here. So, Doctor, I would like to get a bit of an insight into your life. How did a once tutor in UKM find himself at one of the most powerful offices in Malaysia's ruling infrastructure?
I think, first to sort of contextualize the whole thing, my relationship with Datuk Seri Azizah goes back for quite some time, partly because we are somehow related. Her sister is married to my wife's cousin, or distant second cousin, I think. So because of that, we've sort of known each other for quite some time. And her daughter, Nurul Izzah, was my wife's student when she was studying in Uni 10.
My goodness.
So because of that, we interacted a lot. And over the years, I've been the non-politician who would sometimes assist her in some of her speeches, giving opinions. And she liked to quote me as the guy who was her management teacher, because I precisely did that in the early part of her involvement in politics around 99, 2000.
Okay.
I sort of, had some discussion or lessons about how to manage things and all that. So she usually quote that and quote the fact that I said that I rated her as A.
Wow, okay. But I mean, was your rise into that office something you planned, or when you were, because your career, most of it was spent as a lecturer, but was it planned?
I was not expecting anything after the 2018 election. In fact, I sort of taken the attitude that, okay, there's a change in government. Hopefully whoever comes into power will steer the nation towards something better. In fact, I still remember that morning, I think the few days after the result came out, I was actually gardening. And then suddenly I got a call from a friend who is a close associate with one Azizah, and said, "Can you come over to the hospital?" And I said, "What hospital?" "The rehabilitation hospital where Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim was at that time warded there." And they said they wanted to have a discussion. And I was sort of not so sure what this is about. But I went. And basically after that, one Azizah arrived, and we were talking about how to assist her after she assumed the office. And my friend told me, "You should help her." So my question to him, is this agreeable to her? Because I want to make sure that this is her opinion, her preference, and not just my friend's preference. So I said, "Let me know after this. You can talk to her whether she's comfortable having me in the office." So the next day I got a call and he said, "Okay, we call her Kat Wan." So Kat Wan agrees to you joining the office. So among the things we had to do was we became part of the transition team, or even the advanced party that moved into the office before she even took the oath of office. And I think what happened was we've never had a change of government, so nobody knew how to manage the transition. So when we came in, it was basically a lot of trial and error, and we had to basically make sense of how to prepare the office, look for people to staff the office, and deal with the civil servants who were there to understand what are the roles, what are the kind of allocation that the deputy minister had, what are the things that we can do, cannot do, And I remember in the early days, sometimes we would have guests coming, in some cases even guests from overseas, to meet with the Deputy Prime Minister. And we did not even know how to order the refreshments for the office. And everybody would be, oh. And I remember we had the first press conference, and we didn't understand that the media sort of expected also there to be refreshment. So the team at the office had to learn quickly and try to make up for some of these shortcomings. So we were trying to deal with these issues in the beginning. And I am not a member of any political party. I generally do not like to be in politics.
Okay.
I see myself more as a professional, partly because of my background in academia, and later on when I moved into consulting, I see the competencies that I've developed in consulting as well as in academia centers around problem solving. So what I saw myself doing in the office is to help set things up in terms of getting the team, because we had people coming in who themselves were just knowing one another. Some of the people were from the political parties, some were operatives at the constituency level. So we had to sort of bond together and try to understand how to work together and make sense of the many things about how the government functions. So that's when I started understanding what a cabinet paper is all about. The difference between Nota Jemaah Menteri, Memorandum Jemaah Menteri, and trying to make sense. If you want to push ideas, how to prepare the paper and go through the whole process. So that gave me some understanding about the dynamics of how the government operates, as well as I think also the dynamics of how to work with the civil servants.
Interesting you talk about the civil servants, because at that time, one of the biggest, I wouldn't say biggest, but one of the reasons why the 100-day promises didn't sort of become real was because there was a gap between the new government and the civil servants. I think Tun Mahathir also talked about this. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that this to be true? Did you feel hard working with those group of civil servants?
I think what happened was, let's look at it from both sides. On the part of the politicians, the Pakatan Harapan leaders that time did not expect to be in government. They didn't think that they will win. So everybody was caught by surprise, and then suddenly we have to start thinking seriously what is doable and what we have to sort of prioritize things. And the civil servants were also not so sure what this government wants, because they are accustomed to a certain way of work with the previous ministers. And I think the initial phase was like a courting stage in terms of both trying to understand one another, both trying to make sense of what are the expectations. And I guess one of the things that we also had to deal with was that as the change of government took place, there were also reshuffling among the chief secretaries of the various ministries. So even some of the chief secretaries were also new when they came into their job. So trying to get sense of that took a bit of a time. So I think it was partly adjusting the mutual expectations. And I see that one of the things that was necessary in order to facilitate things is don't make things very formal. When dealing with the civil servant, try to develop a personal relationship with them, get to know them at the personal level, then you will be able to basically sort of break the ice and try to come to some form of understanding and accommodation with one another. So my main involvement was at the Deputy Prime Minister's office, and then later on I assisted for a few months at the Ministry of Women's Welfare until because at that time there was no political secretary there. One is I had to look for one, so I was helping there I think for about 2 months plus, and then Dr. Zaliha Mustafa, who's now the current Minister of for the Federal Territory, came in, and I sort of passed everything to her, and I focused a lot more on the Deputy Prime Minister's office.
Since you have worked with her a lot, how what is Datuk Sri Wan Azizah like in the term of a PKR leader as well as a Deputy Prime Minister? How would you rate her performance? I know it's tough for you to answer.
Yeah, she's a warm personality, easy to get along with. Sometimes you have to spend a lot more time to try to convince her of new ideas. And that's what we had to do on some issues. Sometimes she has a general sense of the issues that needs to be solved, but the details, especially when you're coordinating across multiple ministries, that's things that we did. For instance, one of the pressing issues that we tried to resolve during when I entered the government was this issue that came up in the early 2018, which was about the stunted growth among children in the low-income families. And I realized then that this is not a single ministry agenda because it's so intertwined. So
MOH and all that.
Yeah. And in fact, a lot of anger by the previous in the previous government was directed towards UNICEF, because UNICEF was the one that came out with the report, Children Without, the booklet, the blue booklet about the matter. But what people didn't realize was that UNICEF was basing it on a survey that was done by the Ministry of Health. So one of the first things we did was to call the Ministry of Health, please tell us exactly the details of what are the issues, what are the problems, what are the antecedents of the problem, so that when we talk about intervention, it's not just a reactive, just to make people, the government look good, but really go to the roots of the problem and trying to understand. And that's where we realized, after getting a presentation from the Ministry of Health, we realized that it is very complex. Because one of the things that we discovered was that many of the children who experienced stunted growth, their mother, before she got married, she was also suffering from the lack of proper nutrition and was stunted. So there are socio-economic as well as also level of education with affected. If the mother is not health conscious, she doesn't know how to take care of herself. And when she becomes pregnant and she gets the child, she's also not so sure how to raise her child in a healthy manner. And then there are various social, and that's when we started discovering the complexity of the issue. We sort of created a series of workshops to discuss that. We got the MOH to come in, the MOE, the Ministry of Rural Development to come. And so I led the whole thing for about, I think, 2 months to come up with a child well-being roadmap in order to address the whole thing. But of course, the problem with the government is that if you're introducing a new thing, you have to have a budget. So we came in at the time when there was no allocation, so we had to wait. And there was also the issue of who's going to take primary responsibility for leading the whole thing, because between the ministries, the Ministry of Welfare is considered the sort of second or third tier ministry in terms of allocation. Yeah, it is not the MOE and all that. In terms of allocation, I think it got the smallest allocation. But the things that it has to do was a lot to solve the problem. So because of that, it took time to try to look at how we were going to fund it and how we are going to actually get the whole thing off the ground.
Okay. Now, before we get into modern times, this is one more question I have because of my own curiosity. When you were in that government, 2018 government, I think the component parties was PKR, Bersatu, DAP, Amanah, and a few others, many others. But I think those are the key big players. What was it like? What was the relationship like between the component parties in that government, in the PH 1.0?
Okay. I think at the operational level, because we were dealing less with the big bosses and more with the
operation side,
among the members, the operators and all that, it was less of a problem because at that level the egos are not big. These are people who are doers,
professionals,
professionals. Some of them are professionals. Even among the political operatives, because when it comes to really delivering substance, policy changes, developing programs, they realize that they don't necessarily know how to do it also. So they're quite actually willing to at least listen and consider the possibilities. I had some interaction with Bersatu leaders, but generally we didn't have episodes of disagreement where we were shouting or fighting with one another. Pretty much, very much accommodative towards each other's needs in terms of dealing with the various issues.
But when you look at it now, just because although you are out of politics, but I'm sure you still watch and you analyze. What do you think about the relationship of the component parties within the current Madani government framework, particularly PKR and BN? What are your thoughts on that relationship?
I think as far as BN, especially within UMNO itself is not really that unified in terms of how they feel about this government. There are still some of them who think that they should not be working with DAP. And you look at some of the comments between the Akmal and the DAP leaders and all that shows that the continuity of that tension between them.
Yeah.
And I think this will persist. And I'm not so sure how it will turn out in the next few months or a few years, but I can see that the issue of the pardon for Najib is being used as an issue that is trying to create a wedge within UMNO itself, as well as UMNO and the other PH parties. So now it's a matter of wisdom in terms of how the leaders deal with it. Now, how they're going to deal with it, I really don't know, because I don't have access to all the current leaders, and I think that will be a challenge because dismantling the current PH, in spite of whatever imperfections they have, is going to be a painful process also, because the people within BN who thought that maybe this is a workable formula, people within UMNO who felt that, yes, this is the next best solution, it may not be the best solution in terms of their political interests, and are willing to put their bet in it, they can't afford to backtrack now. Okay, they will lose all credibility, and the critics or those who are opposing that accommodation, or if I want to use the term used by Kissinger, détente, between the political parties may end up having the upper hand. So in the interest of preserving their own political survival, the UMNO leaders have to also make sure that this formula is a success. Could they sign on to it? Because if they backtrack, there may not be a second chance to rebuild such an alliance anymore in the future.
Yeah, and what surprises me though, I think that in terms of BN, particularly UMNO, because UMNO is the biggest party there, who else can they partner with? Because if they partner with Bersatu, they'll be competing for the same votes. If they partner with PAS, I mean, ironically speaking, this collaboration with PH is the one partnership that would have the best chance of, resuscitating BN. I don't see. That's why when I see the conflict between them, I just struggle to wonder why. Why do they fight when this is the best? You can't go to the other side. Why would they?
That's true. In fact, I was talking to a friend who was at one time also involved in politics. He's no longer involved in politics, and he was saying to me that if we're going to help the Malays, I mean, he's not UMNO. He said, let's help the Malays in a way that it will help strengthen UMNO. It's better than strengthening PAS.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be better for the country to have, because during that period when they were in the PN government, we saw that they didn't have any agenda, they didn't have any program, even those things that they said were principles in their struggle, like hudud, suddenly went silent over it. And I think that made many people start questioning, are these guys really serious? Do they have a cause? Are those so-called principles are just part of their gimmick in terms of political positioning?
So let's go into current news, Doctor. Of course, we can't get away with Najib's addendum. That's the thing that's being discussed about. I think now soon there'll be a gag order. So we're just at the right time to be able to speak about it. Now, there's of course the big question is who knew about it, who had it, which office had it, and all that those questions, right? And now there are calls for PMX to resign, AG to resign, the law minister also to resign. Everybody wants everybody to resign, including our Hannah Yeoh as well. Is that a fair reaction?
I think this just political opportunism. I mean, let's look at it this way. This addendum issue is essentially a procedural issue.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Was there an addendum? Who had the addendum? And is it a valid addendum? Okay, those are the questions. Now, why would you want to demand that the PM resign? Because Article 42, which defines the power of the power to pardon, very explicit, clear, it is the power of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, and he has to convene the Pardons Board, and he has to make a decision in consultation with the Pardons Board. Okay, and even the AG, I think clause 9 in Article 42, it only says that before the Pardon Board makes its decision, it has to consider the opinion given by the AG. Now, you'll see that the term used in the Constitution is consider. It's not, and the term used to refer to the AG is opinion. Now, usually in the Constitution, when they talk about something, they're trying to indicate something is binding, they will talk about the advice, on the advice of the Prime Minister. Okay?
Okay, that's the term they use.
Yeah, that's the term they use. Okay, the Agong will form a cabinet on the advice of the Prime Minister. But in matter of pardon, the term used is only the opinion of the AG, and they only have to consider. They don't even have to follow the opinion. So this is very well stated in Article 42 of the Constitution. And nowhere in Article 42 talks about the involvement of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is not a member of the Pardons Board. Okay, the only member of the cabinet in the Pardon Board is the Minister of the Federal Territory, because that is considered to be like the equal of a Menteri Besar for the State Pardons Board. So to suddenly attribute the confusion to the Prime Minister is a bit misplaced, because he's not party to the whole decision-making process. Now, on the issue of the addendum, I think someone commented why everybody kept silence about it, why the AG didn't say anything about it. Has to do with not wanting to be seen to be making a statement that goes against the then Agong, who is now the Sultan of Pahang. And I think they are being very careful about it, because they don't want to say anything that may appear to be critiquing or critical of what the Agong did then. Because that will open a whole floodgate, and people say, hey, the AG criticized the Agong, or the AG criticized the Sultan, so everybody can do it. So I think there was that cautiousness on the part of the AG in terms of trying to say anything that would imply the validity or otherwise of the addendum and whether it is even there. And of course, in terms of division of power, the Prime Minister cannot be overtaking the job of the Agong as well as the AGs. And likewise, especially when the Pardons Board, basically the Federal Pardons Board basically say, no, it's not in the minute. It gives the impression that the addendum was something that was created after the meeting. That's the impression that we get. Because if it is not in the minute, then it's not the decision of the Pardons Board. It could have been something that was made later on. So that raises the question of the legality or the constitutionality of that addendum. So I wouldn't get too excited with the prospect of Najib serving his sentence at home, because I think the court will scrutinize the procedure, whether it is even constitutional to have an addendum after the meeting as an addition, kind of a post hoc decision. And I think if I'm an UMNO member, I will, or if I'm talking to an UMNO member, I'll tell them not to celebrate. And I will tell the past members, come on, this may not turn out to be into political capital or benefit for you all either.
Speaking of which, ironically, you were part of the PH 1.0 government, which basically rode the wave of 1MDB into Putrajaya, right? You could say that. Now, when you see these component parties like PAS, for example, who were even one of the founding parties of Bersih and all that kind of stuff, right? PAS, you see BN, all bipartisan support for Najib, all rallying for him. How does that make you feel?
I was thinking before coming here, what term should I use to describe this phenomenon? And I guess I can say the closest and the least offensive term is that these politicians are demonstrating forms of mood swings. Shifting between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's a contradiction. For PAS in particular, before they have always insisted the reason why they cannot work with the AP is because the AP rejects Hudud. Hudud is a principle, okay? And then there is this guy who is already convicted. He's not accused. He's already convicted in a court of law, and they're saying, "Oh, let's be forgiving," how do you reconcile these two very different stands? If you can be forgiving to Najib, why can't you be kind and courteous to Anwar Ibrahim as the Prime Minister? Because they are definitely attacking him as though he's the greatest Satan in this country.
Yes.
So, that's why I said, initially I was thinking they're not even Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because maybe sometimes they sound like Mother Teresa, the rest of the time they sound like Hitler, but that would be too harsh. So I'll stick with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah, that's better. That's better. Now, let's go into race and religious politics. That's, of course, a big problem now. So recently, as we were talking earlier, since the KK Mart socks fiasco, I have seen more and more racially charged events coming out. And these content is being shared online by politicians, member of parties, and they are fighting. They claim they are fighting for these sort of incentivities towards. In the name of championing the rights of the Malays. This is the normal thing. Are we as voters now going to just have to get used to the fact that racial politics is the only trick in the book in Malaysian politics?
Okay. I think let's go back to the origin of racial politics, and specifically within the context of what is usually termed as identity politics.
Yes, yeah.
And one of the thinkers that is said to be the earliest writer on this issue of identity politics is basically Frantz Fanon, who's from the island of Martinique, which was a French colony before the Second World War, and whose work very much shaped the thinking in the Algerian Revolution, fight for independence from the French. And the origin of identity politics was about trying to understand, distinguish between the identity, the interests of the rule and the ruler. And in identity politics, there is always that distinction between the subjugators, the colonial power, and the subjugated, the local or the native population. So identity politics arose within that context of a search for liberation, freeing the country from colonial rule. But what has happened over time, it has become an instrument that has been used to justify intra-national politics. Okay, we see that not only in Malaysia, but we also see that, an extreme case would be Rwanda, where it led to a major genocide. We saw that also in the Balkans, the ethnic cleansing and so on.
Indonesia as well.
Yeah. So the question is, how did this thing start? I think if you look at the constitution, in Malaysia, identity politics has been, especially after the 1969 riots, has been tied with this notion of Ketuanan Melayu. Okay, it has become so indoctrinated into the psyche of the Malays that they take it for granted that Ketuanan Melayu is something that you cannot change. But if we go to the Constitution, Article 153, or for that matter, throughout the constitution, you do a search of the term ketuanan, it does not exist. Okay, the constitution in Article 153 only talks about hak-hak istimewa. Okay, not ketuanan. Ketuanan has a certain implication because it means that even though we are one country, some are tuan, some are less than tuan. Okay, if you want to take into extreme, it's like in the during the period of slavery in the US, you have the slave owners and you have the slaves.
Yes.
Of course, it's not as extreme as that, but it implies a certain feudal connotation that you become tuan because of your ancestry, nothing to do with your competency, nothing to do with your capability, moral character, and so on. And that has become problematic because it impedes nation building. Because part of nation building is to bring people together so that people develop a sense of collective identity that distinguishes them from people who are outside the nation. And doing that requires two things. You have to build institutions that can ensure the existence of society, provide security and all, and you also have to create a culture where people feel a sense of common identity. After 1969, what happened was that there was a kind of a dual-track nation-building process that was taking on, and actually one was negating the other. On the one hand, we had the introduction of the Rukun Negara, which is supposed to be about coming together as an antidote to the division during the 1969 riot. But at the same time, there was this, the ruling elite were also still using Ketuanan Melayu as their political capital. They had certain apparatus that were doing the brainwashing of student leaders. I remember for students who were on government scholarship who went to study overseas, when they came back, and even before they go back, they have to go through all of these programs, brainwashing. Civil servants have to go through all of these programs that basically reinforce this worldview. Okay, and this centers around the notion of ketuanan, and ketuanan has to be protected because the others are threatening this ketuanan. So they use many symbols to highlight this. It was reinforced through a very strong kind of a cultural value. There was even a song that was propagated during those times. Anybody who's gone through this program will remember this song. It talks about how the Malay child is under threat, you know, and all that. But the question is, if we look to the future, we will see that the nation-building process in Malaysia has essentially frozen at the 1969 model. Okay, we've not gone beyond that. I've always thought that 2018 was important not only because there was a change of ruler, but more important is created the opportunity for us to create a new model of what nationhood should be for Malaysians. I was hoping that with this PH 2.0, or you want to call it the unity government, that initiative will be there. The closest we've seen is this whole idea of Madani. But Madani has its own problem. It is becoming not too different from Keluarga Malaysia before this.
Bangsa Malaysia. Satu Malaysia.
Satu Malaysia, Keluarga Malaysia, because in the sense that a lot of it is PR. Billboards here and there. You know, one of the naughty things that I do is that when I get invited to public sector organizations, and you know, during Najib's time, when they will start the program, they will have Salam Satu Malaysia. During Ismail Sabri, they will start with Salam Keluarga Malaysia. Now it's Salam Madani. And I will usually ask them, okay, can I ask you all who are here, and these are all at the managerial level, professional managerial level, civil servant, how many of you can stand up and give a short presentation what Madani means? Okay, and I'm talking to, these are relatively middle and senior civil servants. Until today, not even a single person have been able to say, yes, I can do it. So usually after that, they will start talking, nobody understand what this, what this is. We also confused, and the lady who opened the ceremony with Salam Madani will be sort of, you know.
I was asked to say that. I don't know what I'm saying.
I had to do it because that's, and I think this is where the unity government is missing an opportunity, you know. For instance, one of the ideas that was sort of introduced by the PMX before he became the PM was this new idea, this notion of the need to shift on a need-based policy rather than racial quotas and all that. But I noticed that because there were strong reactions to it, he stopped talking about it, you know. I would argue, of course, this is the academician talking. Someone may say, you cakap teori saja. This is the academician talking. He should have pushed for such a realignment in the thinking in 2023. There'll be negative reaction, but you have something like another 4 years, you know, to use the various apparatus of government to re-engineer society. Now, if you look at many societies, whenever there is a departure from the past, it doesn't happen slowly, incrementally, in a laissez-faire manner. Let's look at the case of Japan.
It takes time.
Okay, when they wanted to dismantle the shogun system, the shogunate and all that, and the Meiji Restoration period, it was a very aggressively led reform led by the government. They basically disbanded the samurai and all that, centralized power and actually...
All the feudal lords and all that.
And then embrace westernization, industrialization, send Japanese people to... And because of that, they were able to transform Japanese society. In Korea, when Korea wanted to industrialize, they initiated what is called the Samyeol Undong program, which is also a form of social engineering, where they basically tried to empower the rural community so to boost agriculture production. But one of the important things in the Samyeol Undong was to also to dismantle the superstitious belief within Korean society, because the government felt that if we want to become a technology-driven society, it has to be based on scientific thinking. We should not believe we be expecting to get our solution from trees, because in Korea, in every village in the old days, there used to be this tree that was considered sacred, you know. In some cases, they even went and cut down those trees to get people to change their attitude and belief system. Today, in Malaysia, we still have even professors, and I know from among my friends, engineers, scientists, even fellow of some prestigious institutions, still go to Bomosiam to cure their cancer. And to me, these are mindset, you know, that are legacies from the medieval feudal values.
But speaking of that, I completely agree with you, Doctor, that PMX should have gone harder on the needs base and revised the thinking of Malaysians. But correct me if I'm wrong, but historically speaking, those types of leaders who come into a country and they are elected and then they change, they bring about change, right? You can go back to whichever century. They generally have a sense of ruthless, maybe you could say conviction towards achieving that goal, because for the betterment of the people. And you're right, sometimes people will respond negatively. Like, for instance, if that had happened, hypothetically speaking, if that had happened in Malaysia where PMX said, okay, we are going to focus on needs-based as opposed to race-based, you can be guaranteed that from the other aisle, our members from PN, from PAS, Bersatu, will jump and say, he's attacking Malays. He's not a real Malay, he's a liberal, he's a Yahudi. They'll say all this nonsense. These are the standard go-to. In such a situation, then the PMX must have a power to sort of silence these people. Because that's the only way. Otherwise, you lose the entire Malay vote through fear, and then all your reforms can take place. So do you think that perhaps PMX does not have the support to carry out these reforms?
Okay, let me put it this way. The ruthlessness in pursuing some of this transformation, you can see it in the Mahathir.
Perfect example.
That's how he got the country on the route to heavy industrialization. He didn't care.
Even people like Singapore, people like Lee Kuan Yew.
Single-minded, stay focused, don't care what other people say, and then they're prepared to trample on civil liberties to achieve that. I think that is not the only pathway towards creating that. we can create more discourse within society. I mean, after all, after 2018, there is more freedom in the media.
Definitely.
The
I don't think
problem-
this podcast could have happened during PN time.
Yeah, I would not be talking like this.
yeah. So thank you, PMX. Thank you.
So the question is, how do we leverage on this opportunity? Now, just because you are liberalizing in terms of giving more freedom to the media doesn't mean that you should not have an agenda to push through the media. Okay? It's about how you basically define your message. How do you actually construct it? Is it going to be an arbitrary kind of a process, or is it going to be one that creates a process of collective conversation within society? I think it is possible to go through this alternative route, but it has to be managed carefully. One of the things that I've noticed, even since 2018, there's not much of a strategic communication taking place in the government.
Yeah.
In fact, when Hannah Yeoh gave me this book, I went to see her to basically point out to her, to have a discussion with her, that one of the problems that is making this government vulnerable is the fact that the opposition are all attacking you, attacking the whole government ruthlessly, using every single opportunity, capitalizing, exploiting every single issue. But the government seems to be, I don't know, suddenly as though, I guess the analogy I used was like a ship without a rudder, floating in the sea, you know.
And not bothered by the waves.
Yeah, as though this is not even a challenge.
Yeah.
I was invited by Astro Awani in the very night that PMX took his oath at Istana Negara. That night I appeared on Astro Awani. And I said then that the biggest challenge that the government will have to deal with is how to actually counter hate politics. This has become entrenched in terms of how politics is taking place in this society. And we cannot let this continue, because we've seen what happened in the Balkans, we've seen what happened in Rwanda, and we've seen what happened in Myanmar. When hate grows, there comes to a point when you cannot control it anymore. So you have to manage it at the beginning. You cannot say freedom of speech, therefore we don't have an opinion ourselves. You know, just let people say what they want. It doesn't work that way. This is real politics, you know. This is not trying to be not ideologically pure, but this is real politics. You have to be able to actually respond to these things. And I think this is what is missing. We have operational people who can write press release, press statements here and there, but there is no architect which is defining, for instance, how do we articulate a better message of a better Malaysia. Okay, we cannot have, let's say we want to shift away from the NEP kind of a model. Can we talk about, for instance, remedial justice as being at the core of our policy? Because remedial justice is more dynamic. It is not tied to a particular ethnic group. It is not tied to a particular religious group. It means justice to everyone who has in some way been disadvantaged or victimized, either by other parties or by the system. Okay, so at one point in time, it can be the rural Malays, and I'm saying rural Malays because the urban Malays have always benefited. Many of them are the product of the elite English education. Some went to study at Eton and so on, and all that. I don't think they can empathize with the children of the rubber tapper. I don't think they understand what the children of the Felda settlers went through. And these are the people who need to be helped. So when we talk about remedial justice, it is addressing these setbacks or disadvantaged segments of the community. Same thing with the Orang Asli. Same thing with the people or the Indian laborers working in the rubber plantations. For that matter, even if you look at this book by Tan Sri Samsudin Kadir about his childhood, when he was growing up, there were times where he had to live in basically like squatter areas. You know, when he was small, his father was working as a driver for a British mine manager. And his peers were also from the other races. You know, when you grow that kind of environment, you see that the poverty, the marginalization is not just certain. It may be more for certain races, but all have to be helped, and that's where you have to address it as. So making remedial justice as the core of the policy moving forward, I think, should be part of what the nation building should be focusing on. If the PM wants to incorporate this as an idea within the Madani concept, he can. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, this abbreviation SCREEP can incorporate many of these ideas. The problem with that book that centers around the SCREEP thing was, well, as a former academician, I wouldn't give it even a B plus for if it was submitted as a third paper.
Now, of course, there was recently an article published on Malaysia Kini where I think it was more of an of a piece that was submitted to them. Basically, this opinion of this one individual, I can't remember his name, but he was saying how nation building has taken a back seat to racial and identity politics. That's just what you just said. So I want to come to another related topic. Of course, recently, Hannah Yeoh has been under the spotlight. A total of 182 police reports related to her book, Becoming Hannah, A Person's Journey, which you have brought. So, sorry, if you don't mind me. So this is the book, which, by the way, this controversy is doing her good because apparently she's reprinting the book again.
15th print today.
Yeah, 15th today. So well done, well done. Every cloud has a silver lining, as they say. Now, I mean, before we met, I actually got this book and I read it. And as I told you before, I did not feel a sudden urge to convert to Christianity. Now, firstly, I want to get your opinion as a Muslim. When you read it, did you feel an urge to convert?
Okay, the interesting that happened in my family was that before I had this book, my mother, my 84-year-old mother, read it first.
Okay.
She borrowed the book from my uncle, who is a 74-year-old uncle. Both of them have read it, and they are both still Muslims. I got this book from YB Hannah Yeoh herself. She gave it to me. So, as I said, because of my time at the Deputy Prime Minister's office, I interacted a lot with her. You see, most of the people, when they talk about this book, they talk about becoming Hannah, and then they forget the second line in the title, which is a personal journey. She is describing her own personal experience. She's not trying to present it as a persuasive account, trying to tell everybody to be like her. Okay? She is saying, this is what I went through. And people who are cherry-picking on the content focus on her Christian experience, about her saying she's the ambassador of God, but forget that before that, she went through a crisis, a personal crisis. I think she went through stress after secondary school and went through a period of depression. And in the process of finding a solution, she started reading the Bible, and that's where she discovered a loving God that attracted her to Christianity. For me, I don't see what's the harm in doing that. This is not the first book published in Malaysia where someone talks about the religious experience. One of the earliest books was by a UTM lecturer, Pham Sen Lin. He was among the earliest lecturers who talked also about his time, his social work, and all that. He talked about how religion shaped it. It was not an issue. Nobody turned it into a controversy. Nobody filed police reports. Why? I think to understand the whole noise around this issue, you have to contextualize what is happening in the last few months. First, PAS had a major setback when the court ruled that Mastura is liable for the slander that she committed against a number of DAP leaders.
Yes.
They tried to sort of damage control by having this so-called fundraiser jihad, Dharma jihad, and people were talking, how can you say jihad when this is about fitnah, right? So I think they needed a distraction. The second thing that also probably affected their reaction to this was when the Merdeka Center report showed that the approval rating of the PM had gone up to about 54%. Before this, it was much lower.
Yeah.
And I think they must send a certain, created a certain discomfort among some of these leaders. As though saying, wow, we've been trying to seize power, is becoming more popular now. Now, of course, Hannah became a target for two reasons. One is because of her court case with Musa Hassan, when the court ruled in favor of Musa Hassan. But I think also because of all the DAP ministers, she is probably the most popular.
And the most likable, actually.
Most likable.
Yeah.
And if you look at her Facebook page, and among my friends who live in her constituency, everybody like her. I mean, I'm talking about Malay women with tudung and everything, you know. She's one of those politicians who doesn't sound like a politician. She doesn't go and attack other people. She doesn't say bad things about other people. So I think suddenly you have this character that does not fit the past narrative of what DAP is all about. Okay? And they have to destroy this image. And this, the court case on this book, not even this book, I doubt any of them have read, I doubt any of the ustad have read this book, or if they read, I don't think they would understand it, the level of English that they have. So it just created an opportunity for them to try to reverse the setback. It created, you know, like magicians, when you want the audience to focus on, you want to do something as part of the trick, you create a distraction. So this is just their magic move.
Could this also be a response to the by-election results? Because as you mentioned about PAS, right? You see in the PAS, Makota and Nenggiri, where it's more Malay-centric population, Perikatan lost, and it was BN2.
But I think it's more complex than that, because some of the seats were never PAS seats.
No, but you can see the sort of waning off of Perikatan's Malay rhetoric, that perhaps they are losing even the Malay voters because they are hard on that Malay sentiment is not working anymore.
I think when you talk about Malays, you will see that the culture in the East Coast is a bit different from, let's say, the culture of the Malays in, for instance, Johor. You know, they are more mild-mannered in Johor. The East Coast people, they are also mild-mannered, but they can also go to extremes. So in the old days, people used to talk, if you go to Kelantan, always be careful of the kapak pendek. You know, if you offend the Kelantanese, they will use the kapak pendek to So that's how they can shift from one mood swing from one character to another character. So personally, I always tell my friends, you know, if you watch Harry Potter and you don't feel like you want to become an atheist, how can reading this book make you want to become a Christian? Because Harry Potter has no element of God being at the center. It's all just magic. So if you're talking about something that is going to destroy your religious belief, Harry Potter is more dangerous than this book. And for that matter, even the local movies, all of this cerita hantu, pocong and all that, would probably be considered as damaging to the belief system of Muslims, right? But nobody is saying, I'm going to become a pocong worshipper or zombie kampung pisang worshipper just because I've seen that movie. But this one suddenly is blown out of proportion. And to me, it's just politics, okay? Because if they are really concerned about protecting their purity, then they should even ban Harry Potter, they should ban Dracula, they should ban, what was that doll? Hannibal and all this, because all this can potentially also destroy the Aqidah.
No, I don't understand how this book is being talked about, but if you go to MPH, you can buy Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. You can buy that. But that book is not being talked about at all. It's this book that's being the issue.
To me, this is selective. This is being selective because they see it as serving a political agenda. Creating a diversion, as well as at the same time trying to attack a person who probably defied the stereotype that they've created about DAP leaders, and which to them is worrying. Because DAP leaders are supposed to be, worse than Dracula. This is someone who many people will probably think is an angel.
Now, the interesting thing about Malaysian version of or interpretation of Islam is that it's unlike, for example, if you go to Saudi Arabia, in the mosque you will see carvings or drawings of Jesus Christ, right? You would see, because outside of Malaysia, in the Arab world and all this, Jesus Christ is, they have a more inclusive look, especially for religions under, they call it people of the book, all these Abrahamic faiths and all that. I've gone to Australia. I've seen Coptic Christian churches where they have Arabic writing and all this. Is very different from how we are here. And when I read books like leaders like Salahuddin and all that, these are leaders, Islamic leaders who, when they, for example, took over a certain state, they would also include the Christian ruling practices within the Islamic way of doing this, because these three religions came one after another. So in Malaysia, are the Muslims sort of not aware of the relationship between Christianity and Islam?
I think the way Islam is expressed here has been too much colored by the identity politics of this country. I mean, certain things like, for instance, the use of the word Allah by Christians. It became a major issue, about 10 years ago. Whereas in other countries, in the Middle East, in Lebanon, the Christians have been using Allah for as long as they've always been accepting Christianity, because they also speak Arabic. So it's a non-issue. And that's why some Muslims in other countries, even our neighbor Indonesia, are sort of confused. Why is this even an issue in Malaysia? Why do they turn it into something that's creating so much tension? Now, to sort of answer your question, I would like to relate an incident that happened during the time of the Prophet, so that we use this as a benchmark about how Muslims deal with Christians. Now, there was a group of Christians from Najran. Najran is on the border between, today is in a border town between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, in the southern of the Arabian Peninsula. A group of Christians, about 50 of them, came to the Prophet in Medina, came to his mosque. Their intention was to convert him to Christianity. He welcomed them. Of course, his intention is to invite them to Islam, convert them to Islam. So they decided, okay, let's do this. Since there's many of you, let's have this like a forum on this issue in the mosque. Okay, so he called his companions and everybody there. So the Christian presented their arguments, he presented his argument, and this was happening in the mosque. And I'm pretty sure when the Christians were presenting their argument, they would have talked about Trinity, they would have talked about Jesus died for salvation of mankind and all of those things. But the Muslims were not offended. You don't see the companions standing, to chase the Christians out. Not only that, after the whole event was over, it was already reaching in the late afternoon, the Christians decided they wanted to perform their Christian prayer. And they performed it in the mosque. Okay, some of the companions were surprised. Is this even allowed? And the Prophet said to the companions, leave them. Let them continue and perform their prayer. Now, if I do this today, don't even talk about asking Christians to try to convince me or consider the Muslim. Let's say I invite Hannah Yeoh to give a talk on this book in a mosque in Malaysia, I'll probably get in trouble. Some people will probably even declare jihad on me.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And I think this has more to do with how the understanding of Islam has been racialized, and the way Islam has been expressed is sometimes colored by what I call a coercive way, You cannot talk, others cannot give their opinion, there cannot be any discussion. In fact, the recent attempt to introduce RUU, this Mufti Wilayah, is to me just another attempt in that direction, to limit the definition of Islam to only certain schools of jurisprudence. Okay? And this is very strange, and to me, it's also reflective of their insecurity of the people who behind this, because they saw themselves being challenged by the younger scholars who did not go through that tradition, are more open to discussing the understanding of Islam within a broader context. So if you are talking about incorporating some ideas that people consider to be Western, then you will be defined as secular. If you are the kind of people who talk about going back to the original sources, the evidence from the Prophet and the Quran instead of some later Imam who came a few hundred years later, then you will be labeled as Wahhabi. So it has become this game, and to me it's more reflective of the insecurity of these individuals. But I also would say, I would not generalize that all the Muslims in Malaysia are like that, because I've also received a lot of, because I posted on my Facebook, basically say, I've read this book, I'm not confused, and I'm still a Muslim. I think I've received about more than 1,000 likes and so on. And I think only about 4 people who tried to dispute with me. And the strange thing is that all of them were basically trying to convince me that my understanding and interpretation is wrong. And the way they do it is to say someone else said something else. All I'm saying is that I read the book, I'm not confused, I'm still a Muslim. And that's bad enough for them.
Yeah, that's bad.
Look,
yeah.
I'm someone who has a PhD. I was a professor. You think I cannot understand this book?
Exactly.
And you have to tell me about a comment written by someone who do not even have advanced degrees, expecting me to follow those individuals. And to me, this is form of coercion. There's only one understanding, one interpretation, and everybody has to follow that. That kind of intolerance that has emerged, not only in their dealing with non-Muslims, but also in their dealing among Muslims. Intra-Muslim conflict is emerging because of this kind of a mindset, this coercive mindset that we see among some Muslims.
I recently interviewed Tan Sri Lim Kin Siang, and so I in prep for that interview, I read his book, and I was surprised by the fact that these similar tactics have been in play since Tun Mahathir's time, even before that, right? When there was always this case, I think when Najib was youth minister, or he was the Pemuda UMNO chief, if I'm not mistaken, he talked about the Chinese, and then you had Hishamuddin with that whole Keres and all this. This repeated theme is there. Now, is it because this type of tactics are the only way to get to the Malays, to fear them? Is that why?
If your mental model is about ketuanan, then yes, that's the tool.
Okay.
Does
it work though?
It does, because that's why they're still getting something like 30% support from the Malays.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I will tell you this, there was a study done by Iman Institute, led by Dina Zaman, the journalist, which tried to understand why, this phobia, paranoia towards the non-Muslims, specifically the paranoia towards DAP is so strong, not only among the rural Malays, but also amongst the educated urban Malays. And when they dissected the data, they discovered that it has a lot to do with the fact that many of these Malays have undergone the brainwashing programs in especially in the 80s, some probably even in the 90s. By the late 90s, it shifted. By the late 90s, the focus was, do you believe Anwar Ibrahim bersalah liwat?
Yeah.
So the demand changed a bit. But for those who went through the whole process in the 80s and perhaps in the first half of the 90s, that was the kind of thinking that they produced. So many of these individuals who hold strongly to these views, to this worldview, to this mental model, are the product of that program. And thousands, this program will run and had thousands, hundreds of thousands probably of participants.
Now, let's look at the source of that, all right? Let's look at the source of that, because as you say, we've been talking about the mindset of the Malays. Has the NEP contributed to Malays being more racially and religiously insensitive?
Let's look at two events that coincided. The NEP was a product of the 1969 to sort of address the imbalance in the distribution of the economy. But the Islamic awareness happened slightly later, especially in the student movement in the early 1970s. Anwar Ibrahim was one of those leaders.
Abim and all that came up.
Abim and all that came into existence. To a certain extent, Darul Arkam also played a role. PAS was at the periphery of this movement. because they have always been politics only, and they were never really part of the whole process. So you don't see, for instance, in the 1970s, or for that matter, even the 1980s, when I came back as soon as I visited the home of past leaders, their wives were not wearing the hijab. Whereas if you are a part of the Islamic revival movement in the 1970s, the ladies would be wearing dress appropriately. But I went to some of these past leaders at their home, and I'm talking about very senior leaders. The wives were not wearing hijab. So what happened was, these two emerged kind of a parallel, okay? And in 1970s, in the university campuses, there were three key orientations. The nationalist orientation, okay? And there was also the Islamist orientation, Anwar Ibrahim being one of them, and there was also the socialist orientation. So it was a contestation between these three, okay? So you have personalities like Hishamuddin Rais, who identified with the left, and I think Musa Hitam was at one time also identified with the left. The Malays would be like Tajuddin, Pasir Salah. So this was the dynamic in the local campus. But you have to give the credit that by the 1980s, the messaging of, especially in ABIM, was one of trying to seek accommodation about inclusiveness. So they were talking about establishing rapport with the non-Muslims and trying to be accommodative in terms of looking also at how the Muslims, how the coexistence. The whole thing changed, especially when Anwar Ibrahim joined UMNO. I think they did not have a leader that stood out as much as him after that. And about that time, Hadi Awang came up. And he preached a much more hardline approach, Yeah. Someone commented about this book and said that, many people have read this book and not even a single Muslim has become a Christian or has become an infidel. But Hadi Awang, with his kafe message in the 1980s, leading to people, past followers, refusing to pray behind UMNO imam or refusing to even attend the funeral of UMNO members, essentially declared thousands of UMNO members as infidels. Okay? And this was something that happened. And for me personally, at that time I was a student in the US, so I couldn't believe. So I thought this must be just propaganda. Until I came back and actually saw that happening in front of my eyes.
Within Muslims, they are fighting.
Yeah, they are fighting, and very extreme, to the point of boycotting husband and wives, not going to each other's funeral just because you do not subscribe to the political belief. So that, to me, was the starting point of the hardline version of Islam. And basically, it grew in terms of momentum. That's why I think when I was talking about hate politics as being the challenge in this current era, the ruling government at this point in time has to come up with a more compelling message. I mean, in business, we call it a compelling value proposition, right? If you want to present Islam in a different manner, in a different phase, a different flavor, then you have to work on it. Not just leave it to chancellors or give it to some university professor who talk it at a very abstract level. You have to be able to translate the message into what we call the street vocabulary. At the level that the common person can understand. So these are things that I think are missing in the whole process. That's why I've always articulated that the process of nation building has to go hand in hand with social engineering. And that has to be what the strategic communication of this government has to address. And I don't think anyone is thinking at this level right now. I think the PMO appointed two guys as strategic communication advisor, but I've not seen anything new come out since the appointment of these two guys.
You're very right. I mean, even in my experience, when I approach ministries to come on the podcast, or we even go to the level of jabatan, you have no idea the number of no's we get simply because they don't want to offend another ministry. They're like, so they have no idea whether they want to come and all that. And I'm wondering, Why are you not talking about your achievements, what your projects you're doing, your thing and all that? I mean, it's crazy. In fact, the other day I had somebody from the Ministry of Communications and he brought up this example of the program Sejati Madani. And he talked about it and I shared it. And I think it was shared thousands of times and people were asking, oh, is this program for me? Can I apply? So that means there's a void. Nobody's talking about it. It's crazy. And they're allowing the opposition to just keep this. Honestly, it's for lack of a better word, it's getting boring. Malaysian politics is getting so boring because it's Malay, non-Malay, Islam, halal. I tell you, it's
and then it's also becoming very predictable.
Yes.
So, of course,
I would love to hear some talk on policies and groundbreaking. Okay, we have problems. Say for example, say we have a rising number of underage pregnancies. Okay, how are we going to solve it? Okay, this is the policy. I mean, something like that. No, or economic. How are you going to attract more FDIs? No, every day is just Akmal Saleh will get up. He'll say something about KK Mat, the ham sandwiches now, and then PAS will say, we have to fight for the Malays. And this is just one thought that I have, and I'll please share your thoughts on this. It is already in the constitutional level. It is already on the minds that Islam is the religion of the Federation, that Malays have the privilege and all that stuff. I don't think other non-Malay communities wake up every morning and say, how do we change this? I don't think they do. They just want a prosperous life, right? That's all we want. In fact, if we go back to history, during the 1995 GE, why the opposition lost so badly was because at that time, Malaysia was doing well. Even the Chinese were not voting for DAP because they just wanted things to be the way they are. Right? We were 8% every year growing and all that. Why can't the semi-urban or the rural community, especially the Malay communities, understand the simple fact that no matter what any politician says, you cannot amend the constitution. Your right is enshrined and protected by the Federation. Why can't they accept that?
Not only that, some of these changes, even if it is passed by the parliament, it cannot take place without the approval of the Malay rulers. Okay, so there are two checks and balance. Actually, this should not even be an issue.
Yes.
Okay, even DAP, I think even Hannah Yeoh made it a point. Yes, she wrote this book, but she took an oath to uphold the constitution. That's her commitment. And I think before the after the 2008 election, even DAP came up with that declaration that we will hold everything as provided in the constitution during the time of the old Barisan Alternative. But they have to keep on playing these sentiments because it taps into the insecurity of the Malays. It's like, the BOMO makes money because people believe that cancer is caused by hantu or jinn. So even if you know that there is advances in medication, you must be able to say, oh, ada benda keras tu, that's why kena datang jumpa BOMO. So that's how it is. And this happens because these leaders themselves don't have any idea. You want Hadi Awang to talk about current account deficit? You're not going to hear. Or you want to hear Fadli Sha'ari talk about investment strategies? How to take the economic transition, get out of the middle income. You're not going to see this happening. Because as Abraham Maslow said, when the only tool you have is the hammer, you treat everything like a nail. And that's precisely, because that's the only tool they have. How to create enmity, exploit hatred, because to them, and when that's the only tool you have, everybody has to be an enemy. Okay, everybody who disagree with them has to be treated as an enemy. So that's why I said, having a better vision of what Islam should be in this country, a better vision of the future of this nation, in other words, the nation building process, is important so that people see that, wow, this is not the only way, this is not the only understanding. It's not enough to remain silent or to rebut them on a piecemeal basis. All of these leaders, if you look at their mindset, they are only capable of talking about the trees. They never have an idea about the shape of the forest. Okay? And because of that, that's how they will play their game.
Yeah, definitely.
And unfortunately, as a country, this is a liability to us as a country because we need to address ourselves within the context of competitiveness in the region, in terms of boosting our not only GDP per capita or annual GDP, but ultimately is about our the innovativeness of our industries, getting out of the, and this is where I will disagree with the PMS, getting out of the dependence on FDI, for instance, because FDI, some studies have shown that had a tendency to actually suppress local technology development, because local businesses end up just being supplier of low-tech components to the multinationals, packaging material, casing, and this, but not the core technology. So it's good in terms of employment creation, but it is not necessarily good in terms of trying to help us migrate the technology ladder in terms of becoming more sophisticated.
And plus, in our plans to become more high income and all that.
Yeah.
Now, just to wrap this up on this, Doctor, based on your experience, your knowledge, and your assessment, can we ever see a transition from race-based politics that I think will be there even until GE16? It's going to be there. We cannot say no, because that's PN's only trick, to a more needs-based politics. Do you think that will ever happen?
I think it is possible, but not in the immediate short term. And I'm saying this based on my experience, myself and a few of my colleagues. When we were teaching the undergraduate classes, we would basically have this discussion with our students. We will ask the Malay student, do you think all of this hak sebenarnya Bumi Putra ni should be protected? Actually, many of them say it's unfair. Some even say, hey, we should be able to compete right now, Probably half of the Malays in the class are from middle income families from urban areas. Why do they still need crutches to have to stand? I can understand if someone who came from Kapit or Muka needing some help, but why would a guy from Shah Alam or Gombak, the Gombak of today, or PJ, still need all of these things? Many of them feel that they can stand and they can compete. So I believe that there is that glimmer of hope coming from the views of this. Whether the less educated Malays are also sharing this view is a different thing. The other thing is, in spite of all the talk about KK Mart, boycotting KK Mart by Akmal, I live in Bangi. It's a mainly Malay neighborhood, but the KK Mart there is still operating until today. It's not closed, and when I saw people still go and shop, even during the peak of the crisis, people didn't take all of these boycott things very seriously. So I think, as I said, they continue to appeal to about 30 to 40% of the Malay population. I think it is possible that over time that 30-40% will decrease. Okay, but it takes effort. It's not going to happen in a laissez-faire manner.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for coming on the podcast. I truly had fun. I wish we can talk for hours, but I think the KL podcast has told me we're not enough. Please, we have other guests as well. So thank you so much, Doctor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I would love to have you back on. Honestly, I would. I really enjoy talking to you. And of course, big shout out to Prof. Tajuddin for connecting us. Thank you so much, Prof. So that's all we have for you today, folks. Please share your comments and likes. I can't wait to see what you guys think about the discussion points discussed on today's interview. Next up, we have, of course, Mr. Siva, a return guest, who'll be talking about how you can supercharge your family. And we're talking about more family values to practice in this year and perhaps to make things better in your home. So thank you again, Doctor. Thank you, guys. And we'll see you all soon. Bye.
Bye.